well lately. And as I mentioned last night, our Bible classes have really uh, done pretty good.
What was the count yesterday morning?
For the worship for Bible class,
Worship
79.
79.
Had a lot of kids. A lot of kids. Had 40 for Bible study though. So generally, that's about the way it works. We get about half for Bible study that we get for the worship service. But that was with some people being go, you know. Okay, so we're going to finish real quickly. We're not going to stay long in this, but okay, I'm good. So anyway, Ecclesiastes 12. I'm just going to read the last two verses. You're probably very familiar with them, but I just want to once again reiterate. Um, you know, Solomon had lived a life of um, excess, and everything he did, he realized that it didn't really mean anything in the whole scheme of things, and so really all of Ecclesiastes builds to the last two verses where Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13 says, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Now, uh, literally in the Hebrew there, when it says this is the whole duty of man, literally it just says this is man's all. So the only thing that's important, everything else is vanity. The only thing that's going to be important, when it's all said and done, is did you fear God and keep his commandments? Well, we got another visitor here. Good morning. All right. Well, you can have coffee, water. We got lemonade. We got tea. Yeah, we got everything. So anyway, fear God and keep his commandments. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So, um, what's scary about that? And why should it motivate us to fear God and keep his commandments? What is a little troubling about that God uh, bring every deed into judgment? And what are part of those every deeds? You know, when you're around, huh? Every secret, yes.
Every single thing, good or bad.
Good or bad, including the secret thing. So, you know, when you're in certain audiences, for example, if you see a police car behind you, I know this is probably too near and dear. You probably don't care anymore, but especially local, you know everybody. But if you see a police car behind you, is that when you decide to really step on the gas and see how fast your cars can go? Is that when you decide to kind of do that rolling stop sign? Well, yeah. Yeah, that's true. But the point is, most people, when they see a police car close to, you see it on the interstate all the time, and it's almost humorous sometimes. They'll be going, the normal speed limit, and they'll see a police car, and even though they're not speeding, they'll hit their brakes or they'll go under the speed limit. It's like, they're not going to pull you over if you're doing exactly the speed limit. But the point is, we're careful when there may be consequences if we're not doing what we should. But the thing about with God, it doesn't matter if it's in public or not, even those secret things, God, those things will be brought to judgment. So
that's the analogy I used to use
uh-huh.
in a jury trial. When you had to deal with or fight someone, when you're trying to explain to them a reasonable person as opposed to a not
Right.
unreasonable person. And when you explain it that way, when a reasonable person sees a police car, they let off the gas. They get
Pull over. Yeah. Yes.
Like, okay, I need to be careful.
Yes.
unreasonable person or somebody who could care less, they step on the gas.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it gives you an idea of, if I'm dealing with a reasonable person or am I dealing with an unreasonable person. So you have to treat them differently.
But I almost think sometimes our attitude towards God and the way we live is more like, well, if we're doing something where it's visible to everybody, we better be careful. We'll watch what we've seen of others. But the thing is, God, even those things that's just in our house, just in our mind, even, God knows those things. And so, it's more beyond. And so that's why it is our all to do. It should be our all to fear God, keep commandments. Well, obviously, this is Solomon within a few years before he dies. And he's learned from error of his ways. But he made some significant mistakes, and we're fixing to see the consequences of those mistakes. Something that Scripture is very clear on, the Old Testament, New Testament. You can be forgiven by God for anything. And that's truly the case. And that's wonderful. And that shows what a forgiving God he is. However, you may still face consequences from the actions you've done. So, if you murder someone in cold blood, you can be forgiven of it, but you're going to have consequences from that. You're going to probably go to prison. You probably won't get out. So there's going to be severe consequences. If you blow up and say some things, that are really offensive to someone and hurt them, you can be forgiven, but you may never have that same connection with that person again. And so, there are consequences to your actions. And so Solomon, even though he changed at the end, apparently, the kingdom would still be divided. So let's go back to 1 Kings 11 now, the very end of it, because now we've got to get rid of Solomon. We got to move on. So 1 Kings 11, verse 41 says, "Now the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of Acts of Solomon?" Well, where is this book of the Acts of Solomon? You can go to your library and go check it out. Is it on the World Wide Web? Well, what happened to it? It'd be kind of cool to read through that, see what all he did, By the way, a couple things here. One, it's not an inspired work. So this book of the Acts of Solomon, how do you think it probably treats Solomon? I'd say very favorably. It'd be like a highlight of all the great things he did or things that happened. Secondly, it most likely got destroyed at some point in time, through one of the occupations. Even if they were to find it, like I say, it's not inspired, so it wouldn't be anything of substance. The fact that it wasn't inspired, also, it wasn't as protected. So when you think about all the copies of Scripture, manuscripts, and everything else we have, what you need to understand is those were preserved. And the fact they were preserved, I think, is significant, because how easy it would have been for most of the things to have been destroyed. How many documents do you know in this world today that are thousands of years old that survived? And then you look at it, it's not just one copy. There were numerous copies of all these things. So, by the way, I recently read an article, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were initially that they're closer to the 200 to 250 BC as they have better science and can look at things. So those Dead Sea Scrolls actually come across about the same period of time that the Septuagint was translated from the Hebrew. It's just amazing, and I think it goes beyond just by coincidence these things happened. God had a hand in that the word would be preserved in the way it was. But this book of the Acts of Solomon, even if we find it, it's going to be an obscure copy, and that's all it's going to be. And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. So how long did Solomon reign? 40 years. How long did King Saul reign? 40 years. How long did King David reign? 40 years. So when you're talking about the kings of the United Kingdom, now David's gets a little bit more, he actually reigned 7 years over Judah, and then he reigned 33 roughly over all, but he reigned for a total of 40 years. But so when you come to the kings of the United Kingdom, they reigned each about 40 years.
Is that a custom?
No, it's just when they died. But there is a lot of numerology in the Bible. So that 40, how many other 40s can you think of?
40 years. Well,
Yeah, 40.
well,
40
Yep, 40 days, 40 nights of rain.
did they dwell in the land, certain land?
There was 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So there was a lot of 40s.
Saul reigned 40 years.
Saul reigned 40 years. Yeah, so and the interesting thing, many of these things can be backed up by history. So it's just interesting. Now, how was that? How did that happen? Well, God has a way of doing things that one can't understand and we can't comprehend, and what He does in His providence. I think it's an underappreciated term of God's providence. He makes things work. In the book of Daniel, it's alluded that the angels behind the scenes kind of carry on the choreography of making things work out. So a lot of the things that Daniel was given through prophecy, the implication was that angels helped make sure that those things came to be. They don't do it in a way where they, alter things, but they make sure events take place that were supposed to take place that lead to something else. How God does that, I don't know, but we know He does.
Turned out to be a special number, just like 7.
Yeah, sevens. Yeah, a lot of numbers are seven's a very significant number. 3's a very significant number, and so most of the time it's not required that you know these numbers and how significant. Yes.
According to AI,
Yeah.
it often signified a period of testing,
Yeah.
trial,
Yeah.
or a time of transformation. I don't know how accurate this is, but found can also represent a time of radical transition or change,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes with focus on new beginnings.
Yes.
When it lists some of the Jesus temptation,
Yeah.
tempted in the wilderness 40 days.
40 days. Yes. By the way,
appeared to the apostles 40 days.
he went without eating for 40 days.
Elijah fasted
For 40 days as well. Yes. And Moses' life, for example, you can divide Moses' life into 3 periods of how many years? 40 years. So he was in Egypt his first 40 years. He was a shepherd for 40 years. And then he led the Israelites out of bondage for his last 40 years. So it is significant. Most time it's not required that you understand the meanings of it. However, if you want to get a real good understanding of the book, like certain books, especially apocalyptic language, like the book of Revelation, it's good to have a fundamental understanding of numerology, the way it's used in the Bible. 7 is a divine number. So the 7 spirits, Holy Spirit. 3 is a divine number. What about 6? Just in thinking it. So you use some thought processes. So 7 is a divine number. So, well, yeah. So 6 would be man's number. Okay. It's not quite divine. Now, man's made with a eternal soul. So he's made the image of God, but he's not perfect. And so it's something other than perfect. So there's a lot of numbers in the So, in fact, in the book of Revelation, Numbers, off the top of my head, I can't think of one, but I'll just say that basically they almost never mean what they say. So, if you see the number 7, it doesn't really mean 7. So, if you see the number 3, it doesn't really mean the number 3. 6 doesn't mean the number 6. So, numbers, they have a meaning, and that's what way apocalyptic language was. It was a style. I remember one time I was teaching a Bible class, and lady she grew up in the Catholic Church, and I said something about apocalyptic language, and so after, she was a little timid, and so she came to me after class and she said, well, where do they speak this apocalyptic language? I said, it's not a language in that sense. It's a style of writing. And so it's a style more so than obviously not a strict language. So they would use it because people that read it, the audience, the core audience, they could understand what it was meaning. And yet it wasn't something. So you think about it, if it was point blank direct, a lot of Revelation says the Roman Empire is coming to an end. It's not going to be around much longer. You don't have to worry about things if you're a Christian. Well, what would that make? They were facing intense persecution. How would that react to someone that's already trying to persecute all the Christians? If they read that, it would be even worse in that case. So, so there's a lot of reasons why apocalyptic language was done that way. It also makes only the people that really, it's kind of like a parable. You have to do some digging to really understand it. And I think there's a function to that because, if you want to believe what someone's going to tell you, that's fine, but you can figure it out, but you got to do some digging. Okay, let's go to 1 Kings 12 now, and we'll get started. Next week, I'm going to have a lot of different charts and stuff, and because we are now entering a different period of history of the children of Israel. We are now going from the United Kingdom to a divided kingdom. So we will talk about that. Now, we've already talked about, remember Jeroboam, and it was foretold that he would wind up having the 10 tribes, and the 2 tribes would be left with others. But remember, Ahijah came to him, a prophet, and told him these things. But what was the one thing that Jeroboam had to do, though, in order for his lineage to always have a kingdom? What did he have to do? Ahijah tells Jeroboam, you don't have to worry about a thing. Your descendants will all be fine, kings of their own kingdom. But what do you have to do? What did Jeroboam have to do? So any people God's made promises to, what's always been the condition of the promise, typically?
You're following my ways.
Okay. So Jeroboam, you're going to be fine. Okay. In fact, you're not going to have kingdom. All your descendants will be guaranteed to have kingdom as long as you follow in my ways. And actually in verse 38 of chapter 11, it says, and if you will listen to all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you and will build you a sure house as I built for David and will give Israel to you. Well, what happens if he doesn't do that? Well, obviously, then it's going to be taken away from him. We'll get there. And I'll have a list of the different kings. And it is also at this point that the books of the first and second Kings, if we have them divided, in Jesus' time, it was just all one book. Chronicles was one book. Jesus' time, we now have First and Second Chronicles. But they will begin to divide. separate. And First Kings is going to see if you how much you can remember this, because it's important to know this, because if you're looking for certain things, it helps you know where to find them. So from this point forward, First Kings is going to focus on which of the kingdoms, and Chronicles is going to focus on which of the kingdoms. So you got the north and the south. Easy way to look at it. So which one focuses on the northern kingdom, or what's known as Israel in the future? Got a 50-50 chance. No one feels lucky. So, of the books,
Rehoboam.
huh?
Rehoboam is the north.
No. Now, remember how I told you to remember that? Okay, because we're going to see early on that his kingdom has troubles because Solomon had enacted really heavy taxes to build the temple and other things,
Yeah.
and the advisors that were around with Solomon said, we need to reduce those now. We've done all this. Let's reduce the taxes. And then Rehoboam didn't listen to them. He got advisor of his own age said, nah, you'll have more money basically if you keep it the way it is. Well, so that's when everybody got disgruntled and the 10 tribes left. So the way to remember it is Rehoboam begins with an R. If he had been more like a Republican and reduced taxes, he would have been okay. But he wasn't. And so it got torn apart. But Rehoboam would be king of the southern kingdom, okay, of Judah. Jeroboam would be king of the northern kingdom, or Israel. Which book is going to focus on which? So does Kings focus on the northern kingdom, or does Kings focus on the southern kingdom? So you got 50-50 chance. Flip a coin. No one's going to volunteer to be the one that gets it wrong. They get it right. Then you can say, man, I knew it all along. Well, Kings focuses on the northern kingdom. So as a result, if you want to read about things of Israel, now what's interesting is you might think, well, Judah had some good kings. How many good kings that followed God were of the northern persuasion, the northern kings? What number? Let's go with, I'll give you multiple choice this time. I'll give you 4 ones. Got 1 in 25% chance. 1, 4, 8, or 0. How many kings of the northern kingdom? 4. Anybody want to say another one? That's 0. 0 is the answer. There were no good kings in the northern kingdom. And you would think by that, well, then not a lot happened in the northern kingdom, but that's not true. And in fact, you see people like Elijah, Elisha, and you see all these prophets, a good number of the prophets and the minor prophets actually preached and focused their teaching out of the northern kingdom. So, but if you're dealing with the northern kingdom, you're dealing, most likely the details are going to be in the book of Kings. What about the kings that fall in the line of David? By the way, all the kings of the southern kingdom were of the lineage of David. And we had some good, some somewhere in between, and some bad. So you would turn to Chronicles. And the book of Chronicles, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, has more detail on their interactions. Now, because they're right next to each other, they have some skirmishes and interaction, you get some overlap. But generally in the overlap, the information about the northern side of it is more in Kings, and the information about the southern side of it is from Chronicles. So sometimes you got to look at both, and you'll see a little bit of difference. But for the most part, it's good to know that. So if you're looking at the northern kings who start off of the sons of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but eventually it becomes others as well. Now, there's a lot of infamous kings, and probably the most infamous one is, well, I don't know, Ahab, but then his wife was Jezebel. That was probably one of the most well-known of the villainous kings that they had in the northern kingdom. And then you get some good kings, Hezekiah, the good king Hezekiah, we say. And so out of the southern kingdom. And so you see that. So we're dealing with the history of the divided kingdom. And so we'll be looking at both. But just bear in mind that when we're looking at certain aspects of the northern kings, we'll probably go to Kings. And when we look at certain things of the southern kings, we'll be looking at Chronicles. And we'll try to do it in a chronological fashion because these kings do overlap. And a lot of times in Kings, like for example, when a new northern king is coming or has been anointed, they'll say, this king which reigned during and they'll mention what the king was in the southern kingdom at the same time. So there's still that connection, but the details are going to be focused on the northern kingdom. So it is divided, and badly so. I think I read this at I think my Sunday morning sermon talked about Mark 3:24 through 25, a passage that Abraham Lincoln quoted, but he's quoting the Bible. It wasn't a quote from Abraham Lincoln. A lot of times you'll see it. They'll say a kingdom, a nation divided itself can't stand. And they'll say Abraham Lincoln. And I'm like, no, that's not Abraham Lincoln. That's Jesus that said that. And
I heard about that on the news
uh-huh. What's that?
about the Abraham said they was arguing that he was one that said it, it's come from the Bible.
Well, I said it in my sermon yesterday, so
well,
maybe that was the news. I like that. I don't know if that's a elevation or demotion that my sermon is related to news. That's probably not a good thing.
Yeah. Your excuses, my memory.
Yeah, that's right. No, I had one of my fellow engineers at the place I worked, I'd go before, it's time to start. I'd a lot of times get my coffee and go to his office and we'd chat for a while. He was big into sports. He was an LSU guy, so I'd always give him a hard time. And so anyway, so I'm in there and I see he's got this calendar. It's got a quote a day. And it pulled up on this, a house divided against itself can't stand. And it said Abraham Lincoln. And I pointed at it and I said, Abraham Lincoln's not the one that said that. He said, what do you mean? Abraham Lincoln said he's well known for Civil War saying that and everything. I said, yeah, but he was quoting it from somewhere else. And so I said, it come from the Bible. So I went to my truck and I had a Bible in there. Didn't have these fancy things back then. So I went to my truck and got my Bible and put it out to him, let him read it for himself. He said, I didn't know that. And he was shocked. He really couldn't believe that he hadn't heard that before. So, but anyway, a kingdom divided itself can't stand. By the way, what's interesting is, so Abraham Lincoln uses in context that the country could stand as a whole if it remained divided. But what is the connotation that Jesus is using it? I took out the verse before and after. So when did Jesus say this? What had they just accused Jesus of doing? He was doing these miracles, and what did they say?
He was performing miracles in the name of Satan.
Yeah, he was the prince of Beelzebub. And so Jesus pointed out how stupid that would be for Satan to cast out his own demons and to cause himself his own harm. But anyway, that's also where Jesus points out that, only God can do a miracle. I find that interesting that people don't really get that a lot of times. It showed he was a man of God. Okay, so rejection of wisdom. So Rehoboam's the new king of Israel. In 1 Kings 12:1-4, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Does anyone know where Shechem is at? It's an old. We'll see. You heading out? Better head out. Well, thank you for gracing us with your presence.
4029.
4029. There you go. News that you. What was the news? Eyewitness news. Yeah,
4029.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. You have a good one too. Hey. 58. Well, 58 Wednesday, technically. Yeah. Steve's not there yet. But anyway, let's turn to a map just to see where Shechem is. Shechem is a town. You first read about Shechem in the days of Abraham. And you read about it through Isaac and Jacob. So it's an older place. but let's go to map 5. Actually, map 6 is probably the better one. So if you look back at map 4, you see that is the 12 tribes. Now that's when they first occupied the land. The time of early judges, Joshua, this is the way it would have been divided up. And then you have the kingdom of David and Solomon. Under Solomon and David, this is when the kingdom got the largest. And you can see there was almost no Philistia by the time that Israel was at this stage. And that was its largest limits. And then you have the divided kingdom. So you have the northern tribes, southern tribes. Northern was called Israel. The southern was called Judah. Southern was called Judah because the largest tribe of the southern was Judah. And also, even though you also had Benjamin, it just became synonymous with the tribe. The northern kingdom also went by another name, especially as it went on. It went by the name of Samaria. Samaria becomes the capital city of the northern kingdom. And so at some point, they just named the whole area Samaria. In the New Testament, what is this region called? If you want, you can turn to map 8. It's there, but I just gave you the answer. Samaria, yeah, it's called Samaria. So Samaria, the major city, became known. Judah, the major tribe, became known as all. And what is a derivation of people who come from Judah? What did that get shortened to? What name? You won't read this name except in the book of Esther. I believe it's in there. Well, what did people who came from this southern kingdom of Judah, what did they become known as? It's still a name around today. You hear people today that are of a certain religion now say, I'm an Israelite. Don't generally do that. They don't say I'm a Hebrew, but what do they say? So you got people who are Christians, you got people who are Muslim, you got people who are
Arabs.
Well, most Arabs are Muslim. Yeah. But there's still another major religion out there. In many ways, people call it the oldest religion. But, Christianity is just as old. It's just the way you look at it. But so what are they known as? People that live in Jerusalem, what are they known as? Jews, yeah, Jews. It comes from Judah. It's just a short nickname of it, kind of like my name's James, but Jim is a short nickname of it.
Wow.
Got what?
Jew.
A Jew. Well, but anyway, so Judah become Jewish people come from that. So the way you look at it. So if you're a Hebrew, are you also? If you're a Jew, are you also Hebrew? Yes. If you're a Jew, are you also an Israelite? Yes. If you're Hebrew, are you necessarily a Jew? No. If you're Hebrew, are you necessarily an Israelite? No. Because Abraham had other descendants besides Isaac and Jacob. If you're an Israelite, are you necessarily a Jew? No. Because you had other tribes besides the ones that went to this. So there is a little bit of difference and distinction. But for the most part, when you say Jew today, you're talking about one that came from this region that Jesus was a Jew. He was Jewish. And so that comes from this divided kingdom status. So a lot of this stuff comes from this, and so that's why it's important to study. But let's look at that map number. What map did I say? map number 6, the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. By the way, if you look at enough maps, you'll see certain things that may not always be the same because, these are map projections based on written things. And so maps weren't as high quality. Also, some of these territories would kind of shrink, enlarge. So this is a generalization of what the lines would look at. Find Shechem on the map. It's almost right in the center. It's
Right above Israel.
yeah. The actual dot for it is
Their temple.
to the left. Now, this map is really hard to tell because one, the quality, and two, it's just meant to be from way distance. But if you look at Shechem, it is in a valley. And actually, I've seen some maps that show this. It was in a major road network of trade where you could go from Shechem to the Mediterranean Sea. You could go from Shechem to the Jordan. You could go from Shechem to, say, Dan up north. And it was in a valley, kind of like the way Boonville's in a valley. You got mountains all around us, but Boonville itself is, kind of down in the valley. And so that was Shechem. Now, the nearest mountain it is to, though, is Mount Gerizim. What is significant about Mount Gerizim? What interaction takes place on Mount Gerizim with Jesus in John chapter 4? You recall the account of Jesus and the woman at the well. She was a Samaritan, and they were on Mount Gerizim, and that's where they worship there, and that's where that interaction comes place. So Mount Gerizim has a lot of historical references in Scripture, and there are others in the Old Testament, but Shechem is that town there. So you can see it's kind of in the center, although Shechem doesn't become the capital. If you look a little bit to it'd be the northwest, you see Samaria. That ultimately becomes the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, of Samaria. What becomes the capital of Judah? You could phrase it a different way. What remained the capital of Judah? Jerusalem. Yeah, Jerusalem. So, but you can see Jerusalem is right on the edge, really close to the border there. But Jerusalem has been the historical capital of Israel, whatever you want to call it, since the time of David, and it still is today. So anyway, so Rehoboam is made king, and as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt. Why was Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, in Egypt? We've read it. We're back in 1 Kings 12. In verse 2, it says, as soon as Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of it, that Solomon, for he was still in Egypt. Why was he in Egypt? Yes, he was. Yeah, Solomon was going to kill him. Why was Solomon going to kill him? What did the prophet tell? What did the prophet tell Jeroboam? So what did the prophet tell Jeroboam? You're going to be king, right? 10 tribes. So why would Solomon want to kill him then?
King.
He wouldn't be king, and who would be king then? His son. So, yeah. So when Solomon dies, Jeroboam, it's safe for him to return, and so he comes back. Then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Taxation. Now, therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, go away for 3 days and come again. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam, that's Solomon's son, took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon, his father, while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them, when you answer them, they will be your servants forever. So basically, lighten the load, but be more of a servant leader is what their advice to him is. So anyway, we see in 1 Kings 12, 8 through 11, but he abandoned the counsel of the old men and gave him and took counsel with young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise me that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, thus you shall speak to this people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but lighten it to us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So he's like, I'm going to be a lot better than my father was. Y'all just thought your yoke was heavy before. And needless to say, that's not a good, from a political standpoint, that wasn't a good message to try to convey. So it would lead to the actual revolt and split. Okay, it's 12. So any questions or comments about that? Any thoughts? But actions do have consequences. So you notice, even though God had prophesied this, people had their free will that laid it out and that precipitated the kingdom being divided. Rehoboam could have listened to the elders and could have changed his ways, but he didn't. Now, God allowed him to make that choice, but God knew what choice he would make. And so that's the way that was. By the way, if you heard this online, some many loud crashes and everything, we were just assassinating some flies. No humans were hurt in the endeavor, but the flies were. So if you're a friend of fly, you probably won't be a friend of this program here. Anyway, good seeing you. We'll take up next week with as the kingdom actually becomes divided.